You have, you've already started.
We've already started. Hello.
everyone.
Thanks so much for being here. I can't remember what we named the collective panel, but my name's Amy Parsons. I teach at the California Maritime Academy with my colleague Sarah Senk. Hello.
Wendy Ostroff, Sonoma State.
Great. And is it all right if I just say what it was?
Yes.
All right. So both of us have received a grant from the Teagle Foundation. It's the cornerstone initiative that gives campuses ways to revise general education offerings, often with an emphasis on infusing them with more humanities-based texts. So I think we have a slightly different project of how we're using that grant, but we're going to tell you a little bit about it today. I think we decided that we would kick off.
Yes.
Here they come.
Welcome, here come the
Okay.
roads. We can let the waiting room, yeah.
Yeah, I know. The velvet rope. So I'm gonna hit my own timer so as to not go over. And so I think what we're gonna, whoops, that's not 15 minutes is wrong. Sarah and I are gonna tell you a little bit about what we're doing on our campus with our Cornerstone grant, and then the two of us will talk for about 20 minutes. We'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then we should have time for us all to talk together. And so I'm just gonna start. So we have taken the grant from the Teagle Foundation and created what we're calling a Maritime General Education Program that we've named the Proteus Program, and I can talk about that a little bit more. It worked before.
I can be that slide.
Well, I can just give you, while Sarah tries to push those buttons. There we go. I've just got a little agenda. The picture up there is a little snapshot of our campus and a little merman. We can talk about that later, but what I want to cover today, I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about the context of our specific campus. It's kind of a unique place. I'll give you a little bit about the basics of how we're using the Teagle money for our program. And I'll talk a little bit about the conceptual touchstones that we wanted in general for the program. And then Sarah's going to tell you about one of our classes that we collaborated on under the auspices of this grant. And so that's kind of the little agenda today. Oh, it worked this time. Okay. So I just want to tell you a little bit about our campus. It's the smallest in the CSU. I think it's got around 800 students. And as you can see on the slide, we're not a military school at all, but which we always have to tell people, but all of our majors in some way prepare students to work in the maritime industry, either on the technical side, engineering, navigation, facilities, or the kind of policy or business side. And then we are really excited about our oceanography program, which has been up and running for a couple of years. And so there's just a few other statistics there. And one of the things that makes it unique, I mean, some of the things up there that make it unique are it's a male-dominated field, so it's a male-dominated campus. It's something that we're working on. And this will make sense in the context of talking about our Teagle grant. One of the biggest shared experiences that students have on our campus is that until just about a year ago, everybody also had to belong to something called the Corps of Cadets, which is part of how we get a military reputation. It's not military, but it has kind of paramilitary elements. That sounds very stern, but like they have to wear uniforms and stand in formation, and it's divided up into divisions with division leadership and things like that. So I'll just say two things that appeal to us, especially about applying for the Teagle Foundation grant. One is that it gave us some systematic ways to infuse ways to value humanities more in a more systemic way on a campus that is just STEM and vocationally focused. And what that can lead to is that, like, at best, sometimes students who really love their general education see it as like a side hobby. And at worst, there are departments on campus that just see general education requirements as a nuisance and actively tell students, your writing and literature classes don't matter, just get through them. And so we wanted a way to kind of not only value it ourselves, which we already do, but have structures to like get everybody on board with the value of these classes. We also wanted an alternate shared experience, because the Corps' goal in many ways is to, the Corps of Cadets is to like do leadership training and professionalism, and at its best it can do that. But it also has structures that are devised to be hierarchical, competitive, and punitive. And we wanted something that was more about a shared experience, more about collaboration. We think humanities in gen ed can do that. So that's a little bit of the background. And so, nope. Okay. So we came up with the what we called the Proteus Program. In the Q&A, if you want us to answer questions about that name, we can. The cornerstone structure is redesign first year classes, extra infused with humanities text from a list that faculty come up with together, a transformative text list. There's a lot of flexibility in that. And so we decided to have students do at least 3 units of a gateway class. And then once students do that, then they can select 9 additional units of their general education around a theme. And our themes are sort of maritime specific. And these are classes that already exist, but it's so that students choose intentionally, I have to take these classes anyway, but I really care about the environment, so I'll pick these 3. And then there's an integrated sense of purposefulness with those requirements. And then there's a certificate at the end without additional units and without slowing time to degree, which is a really important honor for especially our high unit majors. We decided, because we're so small and students are block enrolled their first year, they don't actually get to pick their classes, that we identified 3 of our area A classes, and we just decided all sections are gateway classes. So it's kind of a unified effort in our department, which is culture and communication, that we picked like 3, the equivalent of first year writing, critical thinking, and intro to lit. And that because students don't get to pick, they would just be put into a gateway class if they want to continue with the certificate they can. So that's kind of the structure of it. Just in sort of the most general way, in terms of what student experience is. And then I think in designing it, I want to talk a little bit about our kind of conceptual touchstones, as we were like, well, what do we want these gateway classes to be like? What do we want to emphasize when we start to kind of talk to the rest of campus about this? And we came up with this notion of a maritime mindset, which is you know, and it's so nice to work on a small campus because you get to talk to your colleagues who have actually like been to sea. Neither of us have been. We'll just say that right now. But we thought, and they talked about, in many ways, in the humanities and being at sea, there's this kind of shared sensibility of you. If you're going to be good at it, you have to have some self-awareness. You have to be aware of the situation and the people around you and what they need. You have to be comfortable with contingency, and you have to be adaptable. And so when we were like, how are we going to thematize things? We had this moment where we were like, well, don't you have to be good at self-awareness, communication, and understanding other people's perspectives to be a leader? And our campus also has a large endowment to do leadership training, and it's been a fits and starts of how to use that money in a way that has been effective. And so we were like, yeah, don't you have to be good at all this stuff to be a good leader? Okay, let's hook it up to the leadership. But we didn't really know how to do it. And then a consulting company, is it the Skyline, came to assess, well before we were doing this, came to assess how the campus was sort of doing leadership training. And so we started to look through that report, and then we found this page where we're like, oh my God. Our definition of lead, is it up there? Mm-hmm. The way that we were talking about leadership in a kind of like, hey, let's do leadership, Sarah, with this grant, actually was articulated beautifully in this report. This is just a snippet of it, but it totally echoed our sense that good leadership requires self-awareness before anything else, because you have to be aware of your own limits, your own biases. This is language from that report, that you have to be aware of managing your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. But, you know, for us, if we're teaching critical thinking, yes, you have to be a self-manager, but you also have to be aware of your cognitive biases, the way that you might argue in a direction because you want the world to be the way you want it. And if you don't have tools for kind of seeing that, and that seems to be the essence of critical thinking. And so we really run with this element of something that campus really values, which is leadership training, but defining leadership in this sort of more humanities-centric way, that it's not being good at managerial tasks, right? Or being good at I mean, that's really good stuff. But that part of genuine leadership is about these sort of levels of awareness of self and other people, and then the ability to communicate what you're seeing in leadership content. And using humanities-based texts can really foster that, not because reading a lot of humanities automatically makes you like a better person, which of course we want to think, but that if you do it in a seminar style where you're talking to people about what students, about what they're seeing, they have to practice ambiguity. They have to practice the possibility that one thing can be seen in multiple ways. And you just do that over and over again. There aren't right answers when you do it that way. Like, here's a paragraph of like, I don't know, the first paragraph of that's my timer, of Heart of Darkness, right? And so how is this paragraph presenting what it means to be a mariner? And then there's no right answer. And so I think that's part of what we really embrace. My timer just went off. And so what we want to do now, after kind of giving you some of that big conceptual framework, is a specific class. Sarah's going to talk about a critical thinking class that we redid together based on transformative.
Thank you. Actually, if I may add one other preface to this, going back to the overview, this maritime mindset element that we use to kind of frame our rethinking about critical thinking, which is, for those of you in the CSU, and I guess also the community college system, it's one of the required PE courses. We have a relatively small transfer population compared to other CSU campuses, and so a lot of our students take it at Cal Maritime. They take it in the first year, and it was a course that focused a lot at info literacy, media literacy. After the 2016 election, it focused a lot on looking at political rhetoric. And it was a great, we loved teaching it. Yeah. The students liked the course. But as we were thinking about, first of all, as trained humanists, you know, on a crusade to show all of our STEM colleagues the value of the humanities. One was, how do we connect what we do and what we're trained in? And there was another backdrop too, that since that time, the CSU has, starting next year, there'll be one fewer, one less humanities area, so a lit based class. Yeah. And we were like, well, it's really important that we have not just media literacy, but literacy, as people's skills in reading comprehension seems, in our observations, to be declining. And so we were like, well, we have experts. We don't have comms faculty here. We have lit faculty, and we are the ones that are going to be teaching speech and teaching composition. And how do we take the stuff that we're experts in and also try and use this to get people invested in general education as not just that set of random extra courses that you take that are standing in the way of your license as a mariner. And also, I think attitudes that we observed of our colleagues that were like, how many times do they have to read Moby Dick to get a license in the maritime sector? A million times with Dr. Parsons. So one of the ways that we did this was to try and take a grassroots approach. So to not say we're the know-it-all humanists, we're going to tell you how you should be teaching people in your own fields, but to actually use one of our faculty retreats to crowdsource a definition of leadership. And we strongly suspected, based on that Skyline report, that it was going to align with how we had already sort of had it defined in our heads. And so we asked, we have fewer than 100 faculty. So it's a gargantuan task if you're at a huge university, obviously. But we got the majority of faculty in a room and gave them all a Google Doc for each department and said, we want you to identify all of the things that you think define leaders in your field, all of the professional development opportunities that your department offers or knows about or has offered in the past. And so it was a way of just crowdsourcing all this info. And it happened to be when our colleague Tayo, who was the head of the Academic Integrity Committee, the year that ChatGPT 3.5 or the year after it came out. And so we were leading this workshop to also educate faculty about, look at this technology, can you believe what it can do? And so the transition between the two workshops was to take all those Google Docs, put them into ChatGPT, and then say, can you identify the commonalities here? And the commonalities were almost exactly what we had come up with. And so it became a kind of entry point to convince people that this is something that we should be doing, but was not a top-down thing. And I wanted to mention that too, because I think at the Teagle convening last year, a lot of the focus seemed to be on how you get buy-in from colleagues who don't implicitly see the value in this. And so that was an element that I think was really important to the process of getting people on board. And once we were able to do that, the planning grant phase meant that we could just get people in a room. Amy would buy senorita bread and we would sit around and like have a snack in the afternoon and just learn about how we talk about the Socratic method. And so we would talk about, one of the principles too of the Cornerstone grant is that the discussion-based things, sort of what Eduardo was talking about in the first panel this morning, that kind of getting people in small discussion-based classrooms, arguing or politely debating classic texts, and texts that don't have easy answers, but are posing philosophical questions that people have to grapple with, that this is something that prepares people to be members of civic society and also implicitly as a way of creating leadership skills. And so to go back to the specifics of the course, so we just have here the critical thinking text we did for our Gateway pilot, and we put these together, like both of us in CAD works of literature, especially since we have degrees in literature, we always had lit on the syllabus, but it was, the syllabus, as I said, tended to focus more on, let's look at this discussion of a particular hot topic, and then identify all the logical fallacies and try and think about counter arguments and stuff like that. And we taught a little bit of stuff about cognitive dissonance and cognitive bias, also as part of the logical fallacy unit. And we started thinking, well, how could we have those same outcomes, but focus on literary texts? And so instead of teaching like psychology texts on, or just psychology texts on cognitive bias, we open the course with Plato and the allegory of the cave and start thinking about getting students to talk about that and think about also their relation to what it's like to be the experience as first year college students coming from home, having a certain worldview maybe, and thinking and being a little bit, more self-aware and taking time to think about what they bring to an educational experience at the outset of the course.
Right, and what they can see and what they can't see and what feels like a shadow or
Yeah.
the sun. They went crazy, they loved it.
They loved it,
Yeah.
and we were just like, this is amazing. And you'll notice many of these are really, they're excerpts, so they're mostly essays or poems. We actually, the very first day, we start with Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken, which I'm sure is a familiar text that everybody reads in high school, and people tend to interpret as saying like, oh, the choice I made all the difference. But we pick it apart together and kind of show how actually the poem sort of says the opposite of that in many ways. And so having that ambiguity, like getting them comfortable with day one, that this is what the work you're going to be doing in this class is. You're going to be talking about questions that don't necessarily have answers. You're going to be practicing coming up with evidence for arguments. So we're still meeting those learning outcomes of the original class, but we were thinking about it more in terms of self-awareness and then a transition into social awareness and awareness of others and other perspectives. One of the other things, and I think even though it was not intentional to coincide this with stuff about AI in education, we were also thinking, how do we had to rethink traditional assignments because of how easy it became to cheat with ChatGPT. And so sending them home with a thinly scaffolded analytical essay was probably not going to set them up to actually do authentic work. And so we switched to a lot of in-class reflection assignments, which we had them do either handwritten or on Google Docs with kind of Creeper. I have all the images up on my screen, watching them like live write. And out of that kind of came a really interesting practice that was really spontaneous, and me sort of commenting while they were writing, and if they were stuck, I'm like, stuck, writing that in and having that engagement and sort of cycling through a class of about 20 people in the course of 50 minutes. And this was what part of the first reflection that Amy came up with here. There was a whole long part of, but we're just putting the meat of it here, that the reflection we're asking them to connect something that they read. In this case, it was language. So we read Orwell's Politics in the English Language, and we're thinking about like there's a problem of self-awareness and how do you know your own biases, and and then there's also a problem of how do you communicate when we're existing in a world of shared language, and language does not necessarily have a uniform meaning for everybody. So again, it was a way of bringing in sort of the element we used to do about intent versus impact, but now it was a way of thinking about the inherent ambiguity of language and being intentional with your choices. And so this was an essay that they get the prompt ahead of time, and so they're able to think about it and brainstorm. And there are things about, connecting it to the readings that we did in the first 3 weeks, but it's just a short little one pager where they think about, it's like reflect on a moment where there was a miscommunication, or where you said something that offended somebody and you didn't know why, and then later you learned why, and having them connect that to the lit they were reading it really did seem to make it stick in ways that it hadn't before.
Yeah, and these were separate from tests. Like we did also tests for like,
Yeah.
like concepts, but this was like, you have to think about yourself using these ideas.
So yeah, self-reflection, because it's a major component of it. I think I'm probably about a minute, right, from.
You have 1 minute.
1 minute,
40
right.
seconds.
Good internal timer.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we did, so in the middle of the semester too, we used the basis of the stuff in the beginning of the semester about thinking about the implications, connotations of language, and then took that focus on like spin and ideology that we'd had when it was more of a traditional like analyzing media and news articles, and focused it more on critically reading texts. And so in addition to looking at texts that sort of were on the nexus of like cognitive science and literature, we also had them do essentially deconstructed readings of their favorite like Pixar childhood movies. So it was like, we're gonna fight it out in class and argue that like WALL-E is an anti-environmentalist film. It's actually not, and the students still say, like, I still have now students who are juniors who were telling me that like that assignment just stuck with them, that it was the most fun they'd ever had making these arguments, and realizing that, hey, actually, when you argue against something that seemed obvious, you might end up convincing yourself that it is, that it's actually a new way of thinking about something and uncovering something you didn't anticipate. And so we have a couple of, retreats that you picked up on the student reflections. And these, we tell them like, for the reflection part, we're not grading on grammar. It's a little controversial in a area A class, but we're like, we just wanna, we call them brain dumps. It's like whatever is on your mind. And so some of the things that they said, thought about the first week helped me out, I think in the long run, because you got an understanding of why you think these things. And it's really freaky because once you learn about human cognition, interpolation, and framing, you truly do realize what all these thoughts and beliefs are in your character. And we were just loving it. Like it wasn't perfectly worded, but we were like, wow, this is.
So that was
Like,
kind of, what was it? If you go to the last one, because the last one is
this
so.
one, yeah, the gift and a curse.
I want to be gifted and cursed with knowledge and wisdom. So this, you just wrote that.
And being able to talk about how your brain works and then get to be more aware of what's happening like in the world. And this just came out of the last reflection prompt was tell us what you learned in the class. So it was not like tell us how we can tell Teagle while we're meeting our
Right.
just tell us what you learned this semester. So yeah.
Okay, so we did it, and so I'm excited to hear what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know, I guess my
Is
presentation.
it
Should I switch seats or should I just?
and do you know where is it attached?
To be done at the bottom.
On the, I had it open. Can you see?
Can I this
Open this here. And then
perfect.
okay. Maybe.
Presentation view? Yeah.
Yep, it's going. Good for you.
Oh, is it going? Okay, there's a clicker, but
Okay.
if it doesn't work, we'll help you.
Here's the clicker. Okay, thank you so much. So I'm coming from Sonoma State, and Sonoma State has 6,700 students approximately. 48% of our students are first generation students. About 40% identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Indigenous students. So the program that I teach in is called the Hutchins School of Liberal Studies. And this is a program that was started in the 60s, out of the 60s educational reform. And the whole idea was to, as they mentioned in the panel this morning, get rid of artificial silos, get rid of the limits and restrictive disciplines that we're functioning in, flatten hierarchies, a la Paulo Freire. We're gonna learn from the students and they're gonna learn from us. The students, it's all seminar based. no more than 15 students in a class. It was started with no exams, no grades whatsoever. And this was a child of the 60s. And a lot of this program has been unbelievably popular with a certain group of people, transformative learning, people who have come in this program. We had our 50-year anniversary a couple of years ago, and people came out of the woodwork. This has changed my life, those seminars. We also took general education. At the time, what they did is they lumped it all together in 12-unit seminars. So you take a 4-semester sequence and you're done with your general education, plus one math class. So we covered the entire alternative general education. That way it's all integrated. Every single faculty member had a different discipline. I'm a developmental psychologist. I work with art historians. I work with anthropologists. I work with physicists. We all come together and we design these integrated classes together. But what happened with this revolutionary, magical program is that somehow there was a creep into what felt a little bit elitist or a little bit niche. You know, there were no grades. So all of a sudden, our finest students are not getting into law school and graduate school because they don't have a traditional. Suddenly, we're a cohort model. We had extremely high retention. All of our students were coming through this together. But you can't drop in the middle. So now suddenly we're, you know, as a general education model, we're not doing the kind of equity where anyone has access to this program. So suddenly this started to feel like, okay, who's taking this program, right? Working class students, first generation college students are saying, I can't get a degree in liberal studies. I need a degree that's going to prepare me for a workforce. My parents are counting on me getting a job as soon as I exit university. So our Teagle grant is really about taking this model and trying to find a way to expand this model into a greater group of students. Can this model be used, transported? Does it have to be just this little niche, or are there features of this model that could benefit all students? And we've always said that. I mean, this is giving students a voice. They get to say what they learn. In fact, there's lots of emergent curriculum in this program. There's lots of opportunities to say, let's try this, let's throw this out, and the students have that voice. Not to mention that it's all seminar based, and with the faculty members encouraged to teach classes that are totally outside their discipline, that they're just wildly interested in, right? So I'm a developmental psychologist. I've taught a whole course on a Dostoevsky novel. I've taught courses in existential philosophy. I've taught courses in sex, gender, power. I've taught courses in desire, things that I have no training in, but that I'm just so excited, propaganda to learn about with students, right? So what we started to do when we got this Teagle grant is say, well, okay, what are the things? This is sometimes called magic, right? What happens in the seminar is magic. It's an alchemy. You just feel it. You just get into it, right? And it's like, well, wait a minute. I'm also a cognitive scientist. Like, what are we looking at here? What do you have to do to get this? Next slide. To get to this place of transformative or prison. So yeah, what are the features of this? How do we crack the code, right? How do you transform?
That's working on here, but not, it's not going to there.
It's not down. Okay. Huh. How do you crack the code? Okay, well,
Please stand by.
I'll just keep talking.
Yes, great.
So we know that our brains smooth out our reality for us, right? You only have cones to see color in the center and the fovea of your retina. You cannot see color in the periphery, but your brain is making that smoothness happen for you, so that we live in a world where things are automatic and our perception is just sort of smoothed out. But what we're asking people to do in a seminar is to unsmooth. It's to undo all the automatic things that we're doing. So if you're an artist and you want to take a 3D scene, you have to see that scene as 2D to get that scene on a canvas. And if I show you my slides. Okay, well, it's just like the artist that has to see color and shadow and yeah, has to do that unsmoothing. People in seminar that doing of thinking, they have to constantly unfocus, refocus, undo, redo, call into question not just the opinions and the ideas and the thoughts of the people in the room, but point that lens at themselves and call into question their own way of thinking in their own way. The Hutchins distinguishes it from kind of the graduate school seminars that many of us have had, is it's not about being smart. It's not about being knowledgeable. It's not about being the one in the room that has the answers. It's not about proving ourselves. It's not about intelligence, which we now conceptualize as just a different set of initial conditions. Yay. Okay, so where are we? There we go. Yeah, there we go. There's painting. Okay, so your here's still life, but you can't. We read this as a white cloth that everything's sitting on, but if you're an artist, you can't read that as a white cloth. You have to look at that. There's purple in there. There's yellow in there. There's green in there. There's undertones. So in order to translate the world from 3D to 2D, you have to undo your perception that's automatic. And that seems to be one of the things that has to happen in seminar. So rather than sounding smart, what you have to do is be willing to take a risk. You have to do allowing not knowing. You have to say things in the seminar like, I've never thought of this before, but this, or this isn't my idea, but how about this? Or this just occurred to me and I'm not sure this is a half-formed thought and I feel weird about this, but I'm gonna throw it out there. And suddenly there's a collaborative thing that happens. And I think that's maybe what we call the magic is this mirror neurons, right? We start sharing each other's ideas. We can't even identify who came up with what idea when we ask people afterwards, what happened in the seminar? So turning that into transformative intellectual citizenship, we sit around the table, we have books in hand, we do things like close readings. We talk about the texts and passages, we push ourselves, we push others. We do it over 3 hours, so we have to be patient. I now collect cell phones, so we don't have any electronics. We do it old school, we have notes, we write in our books, and we sit there in awkward silences. We're not efficient. We rebel against efficiency, we reject. We actively reject efficiency. So what is this gonna look like to bring this to other folks on a campus? Oh,
The big button.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, that'd be totally showing progress. Okay, so there are some of these things that I can kind of draw on some texts that are classic texts that we've talked about in Hutchins and say, what are those actual transformative pieces of this? Like, what are the pieces of the puzzle to make this work? If I'm going to share this with colleagues that have never done this before, and colleagues who are saying things like, I don't want to teach a seminar on something that I don't have expertise in, because that's going to be really uncomfortable for me. And I don't want to have a flat hierarchy in the room, because I've studied my discipline very hard for many years to be able to share knowledge with students. And I don't want to rewrite my syllabus if the students decide to do something different with this. One of these kind of guiding quotes that I've chosen is this quote by Nabokov, this idea that the only kind of real reader is a rereader. So that we can't just go with our first read of a situation, of a room, of a group of people, of a seminar text. Our first read is just round one, that we're going to go back, and we're going to go back for round two. And as a cognitive scientist, I think about memory, and memory is not fixed. Every time you recall something, it's remembering, it's a verb. You replace that initial memory with something new every time you activate that. And we're doing that also in seminars. So texts are companions on this journey. We're not meant to craft this text and understand this text in terms of literary analysis. We don't care what anyone else has said about this text. We want to have a relationship with this text. We want it to move us, and we want to move it, and we want to readdress and keep coming back to these things. So there's not really a content to acquire. There's really this iterative process. It's really this journey process. And that brings me to another a kind of guiding quote by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is about
asking your own questions. And my research in cognitive development has shown that kids' own questions matter the most for when they're guiding their own inquiry. And Margaret Mead said the same with her students in anthropology, that it was their questions that they remembered years later. It was their questions that guided them. So in a Hutchins seminar, the faculty member would never put the questions on the board or never would impose any question. There's no prompts for essays. Essays are things that you're writing about because you're inherently curious about writing those things. And my work on curiosity has shown that we're using a totally different collection of brain activation when we're genuinely curious and engaged. So if you're writing a paper, you're writing a paper about something that you can't stop thinking about and you're dying to write a paper about. And if you haven't identified that yet, then you may not be ready to write your paper yet because you need to come up with that. So if you're waiting outside my office to say, well, what's the prompt and what do you want? And I'm gonna say, well, I want what you want. What do you want? And for some students, that's gonna be a question they've never been asked. And I've had many students say that no one has ever asked me that. What am I genuinely interested in? And so we have to kind of do that undoing as we go here. The questions have to come from the students and it has to be genuine. And this other guiding quote was kind of Susan Griffin, this idea that opinions are what people hold to when they're uncertain. That a strong opinion is kind of a red flag. When you get a strong opinion yourself or someone else does, it feels like, oh, we're getting into the amygdala of the brain. We're getting into fight or flight, which is going to shut down the prefrontal cortex critical thinking. We don't want that. We want all of your strong opinions you're going to look at and you're going to re-look at, and we're going to look at each other's and we're going to keep looking and we're going to keep reflecting. We're going to do not knowing. We're going to try to avoid confirmation bias. We're going to try to avoid getting to a place where it's not play. We want to play with ideas, lots of ideas. We want many ideas at the table. So, and at the same time, here we are at Sonoma State. We're a Hispanic serving institution. We have a relationship with the Federated Indians of the Great Rancheria. They fund our summer bridge program, which brings in first generation students to have a summer orientation. So it was like, how can we bring this to the broader community? Can it be transportive? And that's what we're trying to see with this Teagle grant. So we have the title of our grant is called Culture, Land, and Sovereignty. That's just a way we're framing some of these texts. These are some of the Teagle texts that we've chosen for our Lives 101, the Hutchins students, but also for the first year experience, a much bigger set of students on campus to use these transformative texts, which we've identified, and they've come from lots of conversations with faculty. They're certainly not imposed. What are texts like Plato's Allegory of the Cave that are going to be foundational, that students can come back to time and time again, and then also that our colleagues are going to find challenging too, that are going to unsettle them in a way that's going to be fruitful, that we can all feel unsettled together and maybe get somewhere really interesting. That's our hope. And then this is the second semester. The first year experience, the UNIV courses on our campus are year-long courses, where the Hutchins courses are one semester and they're more units. So it's not a direct one-to-one mapping, and we really can't do that because of a lot of logistical reasons, even though it would be wonderful to have everyone in 12-unit seminars for GE, but we're not quite able to do that. Yeah, and so now here's a picture where you saw the seminar table. This is a picture of the UNIV students. So these are the students who are not at a seminar table because it's a little bit of a bigger class. These are the students that are not taking a 9 or 12 unit course. They're taking a 3 or 4 unit course. That's a kind of first year experience. They're with a professor who's from any number of disciplines, but they haven't really designed the course in the same way. And we're just sort of trying. It's sort of like, how do you export a method that's been a really successful and really beautiful method and not get bogged down? And one of the conversations I had earlier today was about access. We're looking at intersegmental, we're looking at access. And that can be a challenge for programs like this that are actually really quite unique and really special and don't always fit the models that we're using for everyone. So here's what we have going on. These are just some these are some student feedback. We haven't gotten the feedback yet from the UNIV courses, from the students. We have gotten feedback from the faculty, but just in terms of the texts, some bolded things, made me feel like I was in the stories, opportunity to hear from some that might not be taught, voices that are pushed aside, forgotten, trivialized, pain felt necessary to bring the truth to the forefront, seeing racism and oppression from the lens of oppressed people. So students who haven't heard their perspectives necessarily represented in a classroom, students who haven't necessarily been asked what they're excited to write about, students who haven't necessarily communicated in a seminar and discussed texts in that way. And so yeah, so this is sort of an experiment, and it's something that we feel really positive about, and we feel that has been going on a really interesting path. And I think the most important piece of this for all of us is really for the students, for the faculty, for those of us working on the grant, is just a kind of openness and presence, a kind of humility, being able to take down boundaries and have learning be transformational by taking our own titles out of this, by taking our own who we are, our egos and our expertise, and being willing to be playful at a table with a bunch of other learners. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Innovative general education, transformative learning. Yeah.
I had a question for you, and I think that kept wrestling within my head was the starting parts, which is so powerful. How did you come to ask yourself this question? Could it work for others? Because the thing that I was thinking about was, to what extent have you been successful in identifying and drawing the students in the first place, and that's why the retention is so strong? You know, I'm kind of playing with that nugget there.
Right, I know, and that's a really interesting nugget, because it's like, who are these people that wanted to do this in the first place, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them are students who have anxiety about tests. You will never take a test. So, okay, that's one. And so we get people in the room that are like, oh, I didn't want to take a test, but I didn't know I was starting for this. But then you get one way that we've tried to recruit is to just have a voice, right? So a lot of first generation EOP students coming on campus, you get a voice. I've done focus groups with EOP students and said, you like this focus group? You want your whole GE kingdom. You get a voice. What you have to say is just as important as what the professor has to say. But it is reading and writing intensive because we don't have exams, right? And so there are students who like having a voice, but are going to struggle with the reading load. They may read 10 books a semester. They're going to come in and they're going to panic, right? There are going to be people who aren't prepared, who haven't read. And we're sort of dealing with that, getting them to, yeah.
Wendy, I have a question for you about working with other faculty in that expertise realm and thinking about GE and different people who aren't trained in these silos teaching in there. If you have conversations about that. So I'll bring up an example. If written communication of somebody, a math faculty wanted to teach, that's a pretty extreme example, but let's say a math teacher wanted to teach a written communication course, which is now area A2 in our GE, but it's going to soon be something else. There's a lot of pushback on that, right? From the GE subcommittee, and I'm just curious, like if that was a discussion in Hutchins seminar, what would that look like?
I know, I've often wondered about that. I mean, I feel like when this was designed, it was very purposefully kind of radically against expertise, which is not what the GE committees are saying, right? I mean, they're saying who is qualified to teach written communication, and that is someone who has a degree in X, Y, or Z. So yeah, I wonder.
Well, I wonder if that changed, because I'm thinking about the origins of the program. It was a different era and a different atmosphere. And I wonder if sometimes, and I don't pretend to know all of this, I'll defer to our head of the GE, but I think some of that resistance is not so much about somebody in math who's like, I'm so excited to teach writing, please let me do it. But like, oh, we can just take care of that in major. Like, why do they have to take all these units? And so I wonder if some of the kind of like hard kind of no way in GE councils is about like, I teach critical thinking in my business class, like, why can't I satisfy area A, whatever, by a class that they're already taking? So I don't know, but I wonder if some of that kind of like, no, we have to go back to expertise is actually about structural pressure to have less GE. And that could just be a weird thing on our campus.
Yeah, because I also sometimes think it's part of your identity, right? You've spent so much time becoming an expert, and now that is your identity.
You can't let somebody else.
Yeah,
Hold that. You
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it can be a challenging experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, I've been teaching a text on quantum, ideas of quantum physics that I don't feel comfortable as someone is asking a question. I feel comfortable as facilitating a text and we can try to pull back, but I may have to pull in someone. And I have done that, you know, a nice thing about an interdisciplinary department is I can go grab my friend who teaches physics and we're stuck, you know, get in here. Or we can say, okay, we're stuck. Put a pin in this. We're gonna come back to that after we're gonna talk to some people. We're gonna figure out this, figure this problem out together. But that can be a very, I mean, that's not a comfortable place to sit.
Yeah, you have to be like, I don't know a lot.
Yeah, what do you think about that? Yeah.
That's really awesome.
I'm really fascinated by both the presentation, like in some ways, you know, what you're promoting is, you know, you may put a label under leadership or critical thinking or whatever, but it really is the kind of learning that we want, and it is lifelong learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, the question of faculty is a really important one, but you know, the answer that, oh, they can teach it in their silo. No, they can't teach what you're teaching in your silo necessarily. And I'm just wondering if those of you who've been thinking about this have thought about how to change the notion of GE as a requirement and basically make it as a fundamental basis for the learning experience in any university. And you know, in other words, it's truly a paradigm shift from these are the requirements to if you learn this, if you come to us with a learner who has this, who's gone through this, you will be so much better, whether it's business or science or engineering or whatever the heck it is you want to do. And have you had those conversations? Maritime, what are you gonna do when you're SLO?
Yeah, it's, that's a whole separate conversation.
Oh, excuse me.
So, yeah, we're supposed to say the proposed.
Yeah.
Decided on. Yeah, it's, totally. And one of the questions that we've been, to preface this by saying faculty are not under a gag order, and so I'm allowed to talk to my colleague and Jen Ediver there as a faculty member about just to mutually understand each other's programs as colleagues in the CSU for no other reason. And we were talking about how something like this might scale up if there would be interest. And also if, fortunately, the programs are aligned so that also they seem to have a similar makeup of their, like they don't have a separate rec comp department. So the kind of territorial politics that would come from having lit professors teaching comp and speech, hopefully will not be, that element won't be part of it. But part of it too is as sort of whatever the model ends up looking like, I am hopeful that it'll preserve something of a campus-specific experience, much that you might have in the Hutchins being a part of Sonoma State, but also a kind of unique thing. And I think the other piece of it, so back to your question about just thinking about the paradigm shift in GE, that is like my life's goal now. And it is obviously, as any of us in these public systems know, it's incredibly challenging because of the entrenched systems that we have, and then also the very real impact that if you make changes, people are losing their jobs potentially. And so there's a lot of sensitivity that goes into thinking about like how you fundamentally change requirements and uproot what people have been doing and doing well for a really long time, but also rethinking it in terms of what learners might need today. So one of the things I was just like, you know what, I can't tackle this for everybody, but like on my small campus, I can talk to 60 full-time people in a week, right? And I can get a sense of understanding, like, what is it? Why is it that they want to teach these gen ed classes in major? And it really did come down to that. It came down to things like, oh, well, we're restricted with ABTs, like we're legally obliged to get students out in a certain number of units. And so we need to meet that with a major course because otherwise we're gonna be breaking the law. And so there were all of these sort of things that emerged where it's like, well, okay, what if we started to change like the structure of how we did things and then also try and embed some of this stuff into courses that the majority of our students were not taking in the major or those double dipped courses. But yeah, I don't know what the future is gonna hold for this, but I have been told to keep going and developing it. We're in year one of the implementation, next year is year two. And so I'm hoping that we can build something that is like scalable and exportable. And also by just trying to work within the system that we have too, like in the case of Cal Maritime, being like, all right, well, we have these courses almost like most people take here. And it's our department teaching them. And so even if we don't get this grant and nobody else is on board with this, we actually could still do this because we have consensus among our people that this is worth doing. But I think fundamentally that thing about modeling lifelong learning, I'll say that for me, the thing that got me like really into this was the fact that the two GE classes that got cut were humanities and lifelong learning. And so it was like, who needs lifelong learning skills, right? Like that should be the foundation. Learning how to learn should be the foundation.
I mean, it brings up, it brings up
exactly.
that question of, what is the point of getting an education?
Yeah.
Right, which brings up the question, we always joke in my center, which brings up the question, what is the point of life? What are we doing?
Right.
Yeah, what is the point, really? And if general education is just something to get done with, I think we've missed the point. I think we've really missed the point. I mean, I think.
Yeah.
And then, as somebody we were talking about general education on my campus at Humboldt, the other day, with the chair of the GE subcommittee, and they kept saying, well, the program you major in, the program you major in, the program you get your degree in. And finally, it was like, you can't get a degree in whatever that program is without the GE program.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh,
Yeah.
I guess that's true.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
they're both programs that have to go together.
Yeah.
I guess I'm assuming that we're still at CSU for a year. I'm in California Community College. Obviously, GE is essentially what we do. And interestingly enough, the models that have worked very effectively for us. So I teach at San Joaquin Delta College in Stockton. I'm the co-chair of the political science department. I wear another important hat. I actually sit on the board of governors for the California Community College system, and I represent all 56,000 faculty. So, work. But given that we're both an HSI and an Anakesia institution, you're probably familiar that there are programs like Fuente and Dream. So sort of aligned with Prism of Equity, we have more sort of learning communities where, again, the faculty who are teaching their disciplines obviously teach it, but they are cohort based. Now, of course, it's open to everyone, but obviously if it's Puente, it's our Hispanic, Latinx students who are taking that. It's Umoja, right? It's our Black African American students. I actually led the development of the ANAPI student achievement program, which is now the equivalent of that, which by the way, we did not have just 3 years ago. That's now in place, codified both at the CCC side and at the CSU side. I love what your presentation, obviously it's all about lifelong learning, but I think the structure is important because we've seen retention higher, obviously it's cultural competence, right? They're learning about their history and their culture. The challenge for our system, or at least my college, speaking of district actually, is creating a first-year program that can replicate that and scale, right? And I don't have the answers to that, but at least at the CCC level, they get that. They do get that GE experience. And they do form, again, a cohort and a group, and it's beautiful. And obviously in their second year, they're now pursuing their ABTs, right? Their specific majors, and they obviously transfer to your institutions based on student transfer. I just want to share that with you. I think that's a model. I think that's unique given the different federal designations and multiple designations now in our institutions.
That's very cool. Yeah, and I think part of the underlying goal of some of this stuff is to find ways to create in different ways, but that coming to college and staying in college and learning in the ways that we hope requires community. And it works best if there's community building beyond just, are you acquiring knowledge? I mean, somebody said that earlier today about, it just fell out of my head, but like there's asking questions or being a learner rather than a knowledge carrier, right? And so having communities where you're doing it and where you're taking risks and you're making bonds is really beautiful. And it's hard to build.
May I just say one thing else with some of these type of programs? We really build out the relationship and partnerships within the community. Where the community college, every university, I think, is so the community that you have. So bringing in partnerships and bringing in, you know, their services. For example, we have one nonprofit who brings in their mental health, you know, folks who have that, they actually teach that to our students. But creating this partnership and creating that sense of belonging within that community really engages, again, our diverse group of students.
That's so
Yeah.
important. But also, I when we're talking about scaling out, I want to mention too, the scale does matter. I think we have to fight for small classes. I think that really matters. I think building a community with 25 is different than building a community with 15. And I think it's much harder to do with 25. I think, and as you get higher and higher, as you just know, I know less about my students. At this point, I know my students writing so well that I know when they're not. I know when they're struggling. I know when they're struggling with the text. I know when it's not their writing. Because I know they're writing. They're writing I'm reading their writing 3 or 4 times a week. So as it gets bigger and I can't do that, and that community and that kind of cohort model can't function, that's when you see a direct relationship with the decline, you know, with the who carries through, who stays and who doesn't.
It makes me think of something you were saying at the beginning, which was during technical problems, and you were saying that as part of this grant documenting what makes the seminar, what it is. You said you were naming principles, and I was curious if those have been documented, or is that an outcome of what you're doing?
This is sort of my attempt. This is a first attempt. Yeah, those have not been officially documented, but it was trying to like capture it. As opposed to a seminar like we took in graduate school. This seems quite different, right? It's not a seminar that's based on content. It's not a seminar that's based on expertise or even knowledge. It's a seminar that's based on a kind of habit of mind that seems to take a while to build. And so this is sort of my attempt at articulating that. So stay tuned. Come into something. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with that a little bit. You know, I was struck by both of your presentations in terms of the selection of readings. And if I caught it, some of the courses, you were reading a single book, a Dostoevsky book for a whole course. Then you were saying maybe that, you know, sometimes you're reading 10 books in a single course. Sometimes you're reading poems, sometimes you're reading passages. Can you talk a little bit about that? You know, I've heard a lot about the writing experience, the critical thinking experience. What about the reading experience? And how you balance
That's a great question. We get over the selection of our transformative text list. So you should clarify that one, the readings you saw was from one of our gateway courses.
Yeah.
The critical thinking course, and those were the selections from our transformative text list. So as part of the grant, you submit. We crowdsourced it. We had reps from every single major department, and we actually just started in this really sort of experimental and almost haphazard way of saying, what books did you all find transformative?
Yeah.
And the list was so fascinating and really surprising and too long for us to execute ever. Like there would be no commonality, but because we have so few, it's like with the number of students we have currently.
Yeah.
If everyone was to select, 10 texts from the transformative text list and it's 100 texts long, we don't even have that many sections. The odds of having any overlap. So the premise is that we want to have some kind of shared experience. And so what we're trying to do now as we're in the implementation phase is to figure out a process for whittling that text down so it's not for every, we want it to be mutable, and we want part of it to be a campus generated thing. With maybe a couple of like really core texts that are foundational to the approaches we're taking in these different classes. But I think that the idea, the thing that I really liked about this project is that there are a lot of schools that have, you know, like great books programs. And we were like, well, what happens if this doesn't have a lot of like Western, ironically, of course, we showed you did, but but if it doesn't have a lot of typical like canonical texts, but we're putting really contemporary stuff on there, and they didn't care. They were like, the whole point is the commonality. So again, the whole point is the habits of the mind, the getting
Right.
together. Does it ask timeless questions? Even if it was written in 2020, that's okay. It's not about a shared core that's a canonical core, but it's about a shared way of thinking and navigating texts. No,
But then I was just wondering, are you also asking about like, how do they read all these books? Like, how are they gonna read 10 books?
In a way, yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
that-
that's changed over time. I've
Right.
seen that change. I've seen
Yeah.
more students right now, this semester,
Exactly.
reading fewer books than my students were reading 10 years ago.
And
Because-
there's an Atlantic article about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
You know, even
Yeah.
that, you know,
Yeah.
I believe our
So
one
that's
schools where
harder.
students are coming in and they don't have the habit mind of reading extended text.
Right,
Not that it has to be canonical or not.
Right.
So I was just wondering, how do you
It takes a
navigate?
while to build that. I think for my students, we were trying to develop reading as we go, so we try to build to it, but I have a lot of students that are doing audiobooks and we're doing a lot of time on kind of old fashioned note taking. How do you take notes? I check their notes. We have notebooks. I mean, it really is kind of old school, but they've never done that. They're building those skills, building up too. We'll do excerpts and, you know, it's like trying to find that sweet spot, because if it is too much, they won't read it.
Yeah.
They really won't. And you're be sitting in a room with no one who read the book. And that's a horrible feeling too. I think they don't like that feeling either. Like, no one's doing that. So finding the right dose.
I'm curious what people's opinions are about the audio books.
Mhm.
I love the audio books. And I thought, like, when I started listening to audiobooks, that I might, you know what, I'll pick up a book, I may or may not read it cover to cover. And it's within the first couple chapters, I don't know, right? And I think about the transformative text I read when I was a kid, color purple, and almost. As I lie dying, back road, right? I can, not a butch print. But what I found with audiobooks is kind of the same thing. About it's like the first chapter doesn't quite capture me, then I'm like, I'm not gonna listen to that one. Which I just listened to an audiobook that was not fiction called Sociopath, and I listened to that one cover. Really good. But I'm wondering what your pedagogical expertise tells you about audiobooks and.
I'll defer to the
Give a
cognitive
thought on
side.
that. I like them myself, but here's the thing, they have to have the book in their hand in my class in order, because we're gonna do text, one of the ways we run it is by quotes, right, passages, so you need to have the book in your hand. So even if you're doing audiobooks, you have to get it out of the library or whatever, you have to have a physical copy of the book in your hand. I used to do ebooks also, but I'm not doing ebooks right now because I've found too many people multitasking when they have a device in their hands. It's kind of compulsive since COVID, so I think the best right now for seminar and that presence, which is almost like a Zen, I'm having zero tech, where you got a book and a notebook in your hand and that's it for 3 hours, and that's uncomfortable for people. And that's part of it, is to feel that discomfort and get to a place where you can be present. And it can be painful for all of us.
Yeah.
For me too, but I feel like, but we're gonna do the hard work, because why are we gonna sit here and not do the hard work?
You're inspired me to try to,
That's
like,
incredible.
we do excerpts, like, we sort of were defeated by the, like, they won't finish it, right? But also Stanford validated that the practice of sitting around and having that community experience and looking very closely. So we've gone for like a very close reading approach, even to the point of giving one out of context paragraph, Heart of Darkness, and that's all they read in critical thinking. Then, of course, because they're gonna read it 100 other times in their maritime like classes, the upper division level. But it's like, I'd say the parallel here is the kind of discomfort of the experience of being like, we're gonna spend 50 minutes analyzing one paragraph, like how are we gonna do that? And then every time it's like spilling over until like we're out of time. So I think there's some level there of that like discomfort of paying attention to something and doing a task that's sort of parallel. But I also think that teaching the sustained attention and sitting and doing that is super important. And yeah.
Not everybody does that, by the way, in my department. Lots of people, they do it their own way. Right?
So ask real quick, since we're talking about the text, I put a picture of the experts in reading. Obviously, from an equity lens, from what we're saying, there's a big picture on decolonizing the curriculum, right? And having the reading sort of reflect. So I was wondering, and I saw that there was some of that actually in the reading list. And so I wonder if you can speak to sort of how intentional that was and whether or not, given that, you know, different federal designations with HSI and NPCs and whatnot. How is that incorporated given the work that you're doing and whether or not you add a little bit more? So breaking down the Western century.
Yeah. Our first stab during the planning phase was like, hey, tell us about some books that changed you. I mean, it was really that kind of like, I don't know, you know, I'm a humanities person. I've never had a grant before. I was like, oh, and so it was a little bit like, guys, tell me about your books. The next phase is to be much more intentional about that, to build in a process during this implementation phase of having a really clear process for building the list, but also assessing it and having part of that assessment be that question, because I think we got some of it in the first round, but if you ask a bunch of people who were trained around the same time we were, it's mostly gonna be Western stuff with the sprinkling. And if we wanna break that open, we have to really do it on purpose, and that's sort of the next phase.
I deal with that same challenge, obviously, political science.
Right. Yeah. So, but that's a great question. It's really important. It's just kind of the next round. Thank you all so much for coming.